Okay, so thank you to everybody for joining me today. My name is Carrie. I'm going to be your tour guide of the accounting setup, if you will. I explained a little bit earlier, but just want to make sure that everyone's aware there is a chat box um, and a questions box that you can put your questions in, and I can answer those as we go. Um, if any questions don't get answered today, you are welcome to call in and ask questions or email me, and I will make sure to get your questions answered if for some reason you were unable to send them to me or couldn't get them answered. So, the goal of these webinar sessions is to give you the information that you need in manageable chunks to be able to set up your accounting. Now, you can always call in and get help from our support team. But these are kind of so that you can do some of the work on your own. And then if you still need help, you can give us a call, but it gives you a good place to start. So for each of the webinars, so I've got them going every Tuesday in November. For each webinar, I'm going to be going over a certain section where I'll show you how to set it up. And then we're going to wait a week before the next session so that it gives you time. If you want to be setting this up while we're going through the webinar series, it gives you time to do the work in between. And that way, if you have questions or you run into things in that week, you're able to reach us and we can address that with you. So, the first thing that I'm going to start with today is um, the initial setup steps. And then we're also going to be talking about the chart of accounts. So, by the initial setup sets, um, here under organization and information, you'll have your information up here at the top of the screen, which, is on your donation statements and some of your reports and things like that. But the bottom half of this screen is for accounting information. There's the federal ID, state ID, sales tax exempt, tax unemployment, and unemployment tax rate. All of these fields don't play any part in the accounting specifically within IconCMO. They are informational fields that you can put that information into store, but it does not feed into another part of the system. However, these last fields are all going to be important. So the first month in the fiscal year, if your fiscal year is something other than a January to December fiscal year, our system will accommodate that for your reporting purposes and all. So you can go ahead and change that here. I'm going to skip down here to where it says first month for giving fiscal year. Generally, this is going to follow the same as your regular fiscal year. The biggest thing to address or check about that is if you have pledges, if you're accepting pledges, what is the date range that people are pledging on? If they're pledging for a, um, you know, March to February, then that maybe should be what your giving fiscal year starts with is March. But I would say most of the time, your first month in your giving fiscal year is going to match the first month in your regular fiscal year. The beginning balance date. So we're going to talk about beginning balances is actually our last segment in this series. But the beginning balance date is going to be when you want to start with your financials in IconCMO. So one question that you might ask is how can I transfer my data from my current financial system into IconCMO? And we don't transfer data into the program, mostly because the majority of programs out there are not set up for fund accounting. And then some that claim to be fund accounting really aren't true fund accounting, and the systems just don't jive. So it's really, really difficult to get that information in. Um, what we do instead is we start with your starting point of where your financials are at now and put everything forward. So if you were going to start your accounting in IconCMO as of January 1, of 2024, you would want to set this to be December 30th of 2023. And I say 30th, not 31st, just for the sake of giving yourself a day of grace. Because once you post these beginning balances, you start reconciling your system, you start entering those transactions. If you realize that there was some error along the way where you need to adjust your balance, but you don't want to uh, recognize it as a revenue or an expense in 2024, then you have that day of grace to be able to make those entries. Even if you think, nope, I know all my balances, like they're perfect, I still always recommend having that just day of grace to kind of give yourself a safety net. So 12/30 of 2023 for January 1st start date. And then I would save that. The other thing on this screen that I wanted to mention is the reversing journal type. So we actually have a couple different options: reverse journal, zero journal, and delete journal. Our default is set to delete journal. Um, some other systems have reverse journal as the default or is the only way their system works. Some have the option to zero journal. So if you're used to these options, you certainly can utilize them. The reason our system doesn't require them is because we have an audit log where you can track everything that somebody does in the system. If they delete transactions, if they change any little piece of information in those transactions, we're going to be able to see that even with the delete journal option. And if you have the delete journal option, it makes your reconciling a lot easier and a lot cleaner than if you were to use like the reverse journal option. Because if you have a lot of things that you're having to change or reverse back out of the system, you get a lot of these extra entries and you have to reconcile them, and it gets a little bit cluttered and cumbersome. So we recommend the delete journal, but there are all three options depending on what you like and what you're used to. So once you get your options in this screen in, you go ahead and click on save. And that's like step number one of getting your accounting in the system. Number two is that you want to make sure that your users who are going to be using the system have access to the accounting. So if you come into this and you're looking at this main menu on the left-hand side, and you're not seeing these options, general ledger, banking, and those things, that is probably because those tabs are hidden. So if you were to go under organization, go to preferences and click on personal, there is an option right here that says view accounting. Sorry, it all highlighted here, but the view accounting right here. This is a button that you can click on to say, no, I don't want to view accounting, or yes, I do. So if you're not seeing those other options, make sure that this button is set to yes, I do want to view the accounting, and then save. You will probably have to do a refresh of your system. So like your refresh up here by the address bar, or like if you're on a PC, if you have an F5 button on your keyboard, that'll reset your whole system. Those are going to be what you'll have to do in order to get that setting to change over to switch in so that you can see all of those different tabs. Um, the other thing to make sure that people have access to the correct areas of the system is under System, Users. So this is my one and only user in my system. But if I had additional users and I wanted to make sure that they were able to see the accounting, I would click on the View Edit User next to their name, and I would go to the accounting forms, and I would make sure that these options all say read if I want them to just to view it, or read write if I want them to be able to make changes on that screen. There is also on the right-hand side here the quick access where you can say all forms, read write, and assign it in one shot. If you are not the person who has the access to this screen to be able to change, uh, to be able to change access, then you're going to want to reach out to your system administrator um, to be able to find out who can change that or if they can give you the correct permissions. My screen sharing paused here, so I apologize. I'm just trying to reshare. I'm not sure why it won't. There it goes. Sorry about that. Okay, so now that we've got that piece with all the access and permissions and such, let's move on to the actual chart of accounts. Well, I tell you what, my go-to is being fussy today. Sorry. Okay, so chart of accounts, if I go under general ledger and I click on the chart of accounts, when I first come in here, oh, it didn't give me, I'm sorry, I wanted that to show you. But when I first come in, it gives an option that pops up and it says, do you want to use the chart of accounts that the system can generate for you? So it's our template chart of accounts, or not. And so your options are yes or cancel. If you choose to cancel, it's going to give you what I have here, which is the minimum required accounts. All of these accounts that are listed here now, they all have a Y listed because they are required to make the system functions work properly. With that, you cannot delete any of these accounts. You cannot modify them in any way. They're going to remain in the system no matter what. If you use the template, though, they're obviously going to be there, but there's going to be a whole lot of other options that you can utilize as well. If you, and I'm going to try one more time here. I'm just going to refresh and see if that'll pull up the first option for us. There it is. That's what I was looking for. Um, the accounts shown are required accounts needed by the system. Would you like the system to help you get started by loading a sample chart of accounts? So if I say cancel, it's going to give me just those minimum requirements. If I say okay, it is going to fill in this template that we've kind of put together for you. When you have this template, you can go ahead and you can delete things as long as they're not marked with the Y for required. You can delete them. You can change the names of them. You can kind of move them around in the structure, and I'll show you some of that here in a bit. But it gives you a nice, good start, a good layout, things that we think that you're going to need in your chart of accounts. If you are used to a for-profit system especially, the first thing you'll probably notice is that our chart of accounts does not require account numbers. If you desire account numbers, if you like to use them, if you're familiar with them, you can absolutely use them. We suggest putting the name, or the number rather, in front of the name. So when I select an account here in the chart of accounts, at the bottom of this screen, it's populating that particular account name. And I'm going to go ahead and just call this my 1101 account. Okay, and I'm going to save my change. It automatically changes the name. Now, if I wanted to take this one and make this my 1100 account, here we go. I can do that. And you'll notice, well, it didn't rearrange. I thought it would. Oh, I'm sorry. It didn't rearrange because they're of different category detail types. But if they have the exact same category detail, they're going to rearrange so that they go numerically and then alphabetically. So the chart of accounts is structured in a way that first it's going by account types. So all your assets are at the top, followed by liabilities, and then you'll have revenues and expenses. So it sorts by account type, and then it breaks it down to these different category details. And then within each of those, so if I had multiple checking accounts, it'll list those in alphabetical order. If I had multiple money market accounts, it'll list all of those in alphabetical order. Numerals, come before alphabet letters. So if I'm going to add a new account to my chart of accounts, there's a big orange button up here on the right, and I can come in and choose which account type. So again, this is the first thing it sorts by in that chart of accounts, and then which um, type of account. So I'm doing a bank account, or there's fixed assets, other current assets, and then the detail of that bank. So is it a checking account? Is it a money market? Is it a savings account? One big major point that I want everybody to write down if you're taking notes is that if you want to be able to reconcile an account, it has to be labeled as a type detail of checking. Even if it's a savings account, even if it's a money market account, I can still call it my, let's say, Wells Fargo savings account. Even though it's a type of checking, I can still do that. These are not like set in stone that they're going to be a problem if you label them differently. It is just so that your chart of accounts gets set up nicely and organized nicely. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't. There's no negative effects if you have a savings account that is labeled as a bank checking type. But if you want to be able to reconcile an account, it is very important that you list it as bank checking instead of bank savings. Um, One thing to note too while you're doing this setup, because if you're not sure exactly where to put certain accounts, we have some literature over here that is intended to help you figure out if your account should belong in these certain categories. So even though I've picked assets and bank here, I could pick other current assets and it's going to give me different options. If I pick fixed assets, so it gives me all the literature to help me know, fixed assets, they're assets that a business uses, which are part of permanent or relatively fixed nature. So it gives you all the definitions and things to be able to place things where they belong. Okay. So one of the nice things too, so if I was going through like with my expenses and I'm in my operating expenses, so if I wanted to set up sub accounts, because we can go a couple layers deep, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But I believe I have an account already in my system called utilities. So I'm going to look that up. Yep, I do. So I'm going to put a sub account of utilities, and I'm going to say it's my um, internet. I might already have an internet expense. So I'm going to just number this one just so that I don't duplicate. So there's my internet expense. So I'm going to save that. And I can add in my next one. It keeps everything here. It tells me the account was added successfully, but it keeps everything the where it was. So if I want to go down the line and say, okay, well now my 1 to um, 20 account is my phone, you can go ahead and save that because that's under my utilities. And I could go in and I could continue to add under that particular sub account, and then I could move to whatever my next option is. Let's say I need to add something else under travel expense. I could go ahead and do that here. And then when I'm all done adding accounts, I can close and come out of that chart of accounts. Um, I'm going to show you an example of the 3 accounts or the 3 layers just so you can kind of see. So excuse me while I scroll all the way down here. Um, oh, I haven't set them up yet. So I've got office expenses and I've got printing expenses. So you can tell office is my header. So that means I can get a expense sheet that shows me my total of all office expenses, and all of these things underneath it are sub accounts, so I can get a balance for each of these individually, but then they can all roll up into one overall balance. Now if I wanted to break down even further, let's say with printing expenses, I want to add something more to that. I'm going to break that down. So here I'm looking for printing expenses. There we go, I found it. And I also want to know how much of my printing expenses do I spend on paper? And I want to know how much do I spend on ink? generally you're not going to be that granular in your chart of accounts. I'm just putting this in as an example for you. But usually people don't generally worry about the real specifics like this when it comes to setting up a chart of account. But now you can see here that I can get a subtotal for each of those items. I can get an overall total for that printing, and then I can get an overall total of the office expenses. Okay. Um, if you happen to have, um, like, if I was setting this up and I didn't know for sure all of my expenses and revenues and things like that, I wouldn't stress too much about it because in order to get started and put in your beginning balances and things like that, um, and set up other parts of the system, the assets and the liabilities are going to be the most important for you to get in right away. Revenues and expenses can always be added along the way. I'm just going to show you an example of how you can add it after you've gone through your chart of accounts, even in the middle of a transaction. So if I'm writing a check from this account, I don't have a vendor yet, so excuse me while I add, we'll just say Amazon. I'm going to add that, and we'll say it's actually not a check, it's an EFT transaction. Um, and I spent $20, and I'm going to say that I have a webinar training fee that I'm spending it on. Um, so I don't have that account, but it tells me right here I can click to add it. It automatically pops up and then allows me to put it as a sub account of things, whatever I'm looking for, and then I can save it as I go. So don't stress too much about not getting those revenues and expenses into the chart of accounts right away. And the other thing too is if you realize that you have some duplicates, so let me go back to that internet because I'm pretty sure that is duplicate. Yeah. So I have internet listed here. I have internet listed here. And I really want to keep this internet, because it's under telephone and internet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, and I don't have any transactions right now, so I could actually take and I could delete this out of the chart of accounts. Um, if you start having history or start having transactions, you can actually take and transfer all of the transactions from one account to the other account, and then I can delete this because it'll no longer have history. So that's something you can do down the road if you find out you have duplicates. So again, don't stress too much about things being perfect right away. Since I don't have any activity, I'm just going to go ahead and delete that one right away. If you do have something down the road that you realize, well, we no longer have, like, let's say a phone line. Um, everybody's using their cell phones now. So we no longer have this utility phone line. So I could take this and I could, if I have history to it, I still want to keep the history because it was a past expense that we had. I just don't want to combine it with something else, and I don't want to use it anymore. You can always make it an inactive item in your chart of accounts. It remains as part of your chart of accounts, but it will be inactive so that it cannot be selected for use when you're creating those transactions later on. And you may notice that there's a description field here, which is the same description field as when I was entering in transactions. So there's an optional field. You can kind of use this for whatever you like. Some people, if they don't want to put the numbers in the chart of accounts, but they have one person who still kind of likes to make sure that they're getting the numbers, you might put them here. If you have certain things that aren't terribly clear in their account name of what they're for, and you wanted to add a description here for other users so that they knew exactly what that was for, you can certainly put that there. You can see it's optional, so it's not a required field, but if you wanted to put that description in, it does not show up anywhere else really other than right here. So you're not going to see it on reports or anything like that. Okay. We also have the ability to change the structure. So if I'm looking at this right now and I see, oh, okay, there's this internet expense, which is under telephone internet, but I actually want it under utilities. I do want it under utilities. I can change the account position and say, okay, well, now I want it under that account. And I'll save it. And if I go back out here, if I look for my utilities, okay, cool. Now my internet expense is under utilities like I wanted it to be. So you can actually shuffle things around um, after you get that original setup done. So again, don't stress too much about getting it completely right the first time. Um, the big things to make sure that you're doing, like I said, is with that reconcilable accounts, you want to mark as bank checking. And in order to get your beginning balances in, you want checking accounts and asset accounts. One thing I do also want to stress is that you really should never have sub accounts of your asset accounts, like your bank accounts. Some people we've seen will have like the accounts and then they'll have their sub accounts as like their funds because that's what QuickBooks had it or that's how QuickBooks had them set it up. But this is not the place to put in your funds. There is a whole nother section which we'll be talking about later in another series that you're going to enter in your funds. So you should not have something that says 1101 checking and then a sub account beneath it that says general checking, and then one beneath it that says restricted checking, and then one beneath it that says alter fund checking or anything like that. If you have your checking account has 3 different funds that have money within it, that is going to be determined by the fund list and the beginning balance screen. So don't add those into your chart of accounts. If you end up setting up your chart of accounts and you would like someone from Icon Systems to just look it over to see if everything looks correct, we're happy to do that. So go ahead and give us a call and say, hey, this is my account number. Would you just look at my chart of accounts and see if everything looks okay to you? Um, Another big thing that I want to stress with chart of accounts is that you probably don't want to use the word fund in your chart of accounts. So some people will say, like, this is my general checking account. Some people will call that their general fund checking. Because there is a fund list, which is separate than your chart of accounts, it can get very confusing if you're using the word fund in your chart of accounts. So try to consciously just remove the word fund. So anywhere that it's general fund checking, just say general checking. Or general fund revenue, just say general revenue. Remove that word fund because it will make things a lot clearer and easier for users going forward, especially when calling and asking questions, um, and to have that separation of those things. Okay. Um, I also should show you here that in this chart of accounts that we have, you're also able to manage tags down here at the bottom. This is a relatively new feature for us. If you're a CMO user already, you probably saw that in the announcements, I don't know, a couple months ago maybe. So tags are just another way to classify your transactions. So we're classifying them already with, like what account are they going to? What revenue or expense account are they hitting? We're going to be saying what fund do they come out of? And then you can also add tags. So like if you have a specific um, so let's say you have a missions fund in your accounting, but you want to tag specifically which missions certain transactions are for. Perfect. I am not necessarily a spelling genius, so if that's spelled incorrectly, forgive me. We'll use things I know how to spell a little better. Okay, so we've got a couple of things here. Um, just so that I have some kind of tags in there. And if I go out to like my register, I don't have anything. So let's go to journal entries. If I go to a journal entry to create a new entry, I can put in, again, I've got my fund. I can put in, let's say my asset account is receiving $100. So revenue, pick, I'm just going to grab a revenue and $100. And this was for this particular fund. And then when I go into my GL register, you can see that there's tags here as well. So I could search by my tags. Okay. This is another thing to mention too. You can start posting transactions before you're finished with all of your setup. Like, so before you get your beginning balances and things like that, you can start posting transactions. I don't necessarily recommend it, especially if you're not sure if your structures are correct and if you're, um, if you've got everything right yet, but it is a possibility. So if you kind of have an idea of what you're doing and you think you're in a good place, go right ahead. Your balance sheets will never be accurate though until we do the beginning balance piece. And that's actually, like I said, the last step in our series. So we will come to that at another day. Well, let me double check my notes just to make sure there isn't anything else that I wanted to tell you. I know I put down a couple notes of things that I thought were important that you really needed to know. This isn't necessarily relative to today specifically webinar, but it doesn't necessarily fit, I don't think, into any of my other webinars. So I will mention now that there is a difference between cash-based accounting and accrual-based accounting. If you are cash-based accounting, you generally are not going to use the AR and the AP modules in the system. When you are accrual-based accounting, you are recognizing that expense as soon as you get the invoice and as soon as you put that invoice in. So if you get a bill from your, let's say, utility company on December 25th, which is the last month of your fiscal year, and you're not paying it off until January 3rd of the new fiscal year, if you're accrual based, you are putting that invoice in December because that is when you are recognizing the expense, even though it doesn't leave your account until January. If you are cash based, you are recognizing that expense at the time you actually pay it. So if I'm paying it in January 3rd, it is a January expense. So there is a big difference. And I just wanted to mention that because a lot of people like to go in and enter those invoices for their vendors. Um, ahead of time and they aren't necessarily accrual based. So that ends up messing with their reports a little bit. So that's something that I would check if you're not sure. Check with your board or your financial committee to figure out whether you are cash or accrual based. So, real short and sweet, that's all I had for today. Next week, my topics are going to be vendor list, and I think I'm going to also talk a little bit about customers if anybody does have account receivable, and then the linking of donations to accounting. You know what? I apologize. That's going to be the one after. Next week we're going to work through funds and budgeting because we want to talk about that fund list next. Um, if anybody has any questions, I would welcome you to go ahead and send them to me right now via chat or in the questions section of your GoToMeeting, and then I can answer them here on the webinar. Or if you wanted me to re-show you another section on the screen, I can do that. All right. Well, I don't see any questions coming in. So either I did a really awesome job at explaining everything, or everybody feels pretty good with the answers. Um, so if you do have any questions and you want to send them to us afterward, you are welcome to send them to our support email address, which is support@iconcmo.com, or you can call our technical support line at 218-236-1899. And yes, I will get this video sent out to each one of you after the webinar. It takes a little bit for it to process on my end, but I will make sure that everyone who has attended here and everyone who has signed up will get the link to this video, and that way you can download it, you can share it with whomever you need, so that you can come back and reference this video again. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today, everybody. I'm going to end our recording now, and I hope to see you next time.